welcome everyone. So happy to see you. It's been a little while. I've been traveling and so on. And coming back to the end of the chapter, book number 12, which was the teaching of the chief in goodness. And I think we reached the end of that chapter, I believe. And I opened the book to the end of the chapter, and it said this, which I liked very much. It said, if one provides comforts for an aeon to the homes of beings numerous as atoms in 10 lands, his merit is not to be considered supreme. One who believes this teaching is more excellent. Even spending an aeon serving Buddhas as many as atoms in 10 lands, one's merit will be greater, supreme, if one can recite and hold this book. Isn't that great? When the enlightening being chief in goodness had spoken these verses, the worlds in the 10 directions quaked in 6 ways. The palace of demons was shrouded. The realms of ill ceased. The Buddhas of the 10 directions appeared before him, and each patted him on the head with his right hand and praised him, saying, "Excellent, you incisively explain this teaching," and we all accordingly rejoice. And I think we did. I think we reached to the end. I think in the heaven of happiness, in the heaven of access to others' enjoyments, thunder is like the voice of Brahma. In the heaven of enjoyment of emanation, it's like the sound of great drums. In the heaven of happiness, it's like the sound of singing. In the heaven of timely portion, it's like the voices of goddesses. He's coming down in the heavens of here. In the heaven of 33 celestial regions, it's like the various sounds of kinnaras. In the heaven, that's a reverse centaur, horse's head and human body. In the heaven of the 4 world-guarding kings, it's like the sounds produced by Gandharvas. In the ocean, it sounds like mountains crashing together. Among the kinnaras, it's the sound of pipes. In the castle of dragons, it sounds like the call of Kalavinka birds. In the yakshas, that's the ogre's abode, it's like the voices of dragon maidens. Among the titans, it sounds like a celestial drum. And among humans, it's like the sound of surf. So in a way, this, just remembering this, so it's for the setting of the next chapter, because he's sort of giving the whole cosmos in this previous one, those of you who attended last week, and he's sort of outlining the whole Buddhist cosmos, which contains heavens up to the top. It has hells, it has what I call preta realms of hungry ghosts, people call it, but they're not ghosts, they're hungry beings, realms of hungry beings. Then the animal kingdom of below the human level, without the same level of language and so on. Then the human realm, and then the Titan realm of sort of the demigods, you could call them, or Titans. Then the gods, and then the god realms begins with the realm of the 4 kings. Then the city of 33 of Indra, the Olympus. Then off the planet, no longer on the planet, you have the heaven beyond contention, the heaven of satisfaction, the heaven of controlling others, enjoying whatever you fantasize, and the heaven of controlling others' emanations, which is sort of, you're so jaded with pleasure up there, you're a voyeur heaven. And then beyond that, the form realm with 17 levels of heaven, which are corresponding to the 4 immeasurables: immeasurable love, joy, compassion, joy, and equanimity. 3, 3, 3, and 7 or 8. Actually, heavens where the beings have Brahma bodies, which is non-binary. They're male, female, they're androgynous, all of them. They wrongly say in the ancient texts, simplistically say just there are no females. But actually the point is everybody is non-binary. And they have these sort of less boundaried bodies, they're kind of energy bodies in the realm of pure form because they have no lust. They don't feel, bereft of a partner because they have non-binary, they have both male and female components fully present in their bodies. And beyond that, in a way not beyond, but in a sense, sort of experientially beyond that, is the realm with no form, with no matter, disembodied realm of pure mind, seemingly pure mind when you're in it, but you have a very subtle body, but there's no sense of body. So it's just mental state, and that's realm of infinite space, infinite consciousness, seeming nothingness, and beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. And so that's what the Buddhist Cosmos is, called the three realms. And nirvana is none of them in the dualistic way of teaching Buddhism, which Buddha did to those who couldn't imagine living in the world in a state of bliss all the time, because they're too much giving reality to the problems and the way their habitual perception of solid things around them and so on, and limited bodies. And so to them he taught that nirvana was somewhere else, some other state. But he never specified on purpose. He was very cagey about it and wouldn't quite say, well, is there somewhere or where is it? And then he actually said where it is everywhere here. When you have no craving and when you're content wherever you are, then that's nirvana. He kind of said, hinted to them, but they didn't listen to that, and they still thought they were getting out of the world. And then in the non-dual teaching, which is the higher one, he later said anyway, nirvana is everywhere here when you're in a different state. And you understand it as a different place, actually. You understand what it is here. It's made of pure energy, and you're an energy being, and you can be engaged with others suffering to help them, but you never suffer yourself at that point because you're in nirvana. You're in non-dual nirvana samsara. So he's introducing that. And of course, remember, this is all happening from the time when Buddha initially attains enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And so then he gives his first teaching is sort of like the place, the magical place under the Bodhi tree where he attained that enlightenment, expands and sort of embraces the whole cosmos. And beings from other universes come, bodhisattvas from other humanoid universes come from all over the place. And they attend on his wonderful moment of becoming infinite, if you will, and yet remaining an individual, continuum of an individual, to enjoy the infinity of oneness with everyone and being himself as well, only for the benefit of others, and in many bodies, actually. Marvelous, either a picture or a fantasy of what a Buddha being is, depending on how it all turns out and what you believe. Okay, so then in book 13, he actually leaves the human plane and he ascends to the peak of Mount Sumeru, and that's like a peak of Olympus, and actually it's sort of like on the North Pole, you could kind of say, because they are thinking that the planet is a mountain, and it has it's not really a flat Earth theory. It's like the Earth is a kind of giant mountain lump, but down in the base of it, at the base of the mountain, are all kinds of oceans, and then under the oceans there's a realm of pure energy, like a wind plane. And then at the bottom of the oceans and the wind plane, there's all kind of hellish states and all kinds of things. So it's kind of an old-fashioned cosmology rather than the round planet cosmology. But and then there's fire down inside, like magma. We have magma inside the planet. So it's kind of an approximation of our view of of our modern view of the planet. People say flat Earth. Then sticking off this mountain, there are flat plains, like the Eurasia is one flat plane, and then Africa, and then America is over there is another one. So they sort of stick out from the mountain on the east, and ours is on the south. The one where we live is on the if we were in India, is on the south, and the American one I think is on the north, over the other side of the cosmic mountain, and then there's the south, east and west, and so that's the old cosmology. And it's not the cosmology in the Kalachakra Tantra. There are some other texts where they give a different one, because in a way they make the cosmology relative to the person, in a sense. And because remember, the Buddha said that all theories about the nature of relative reality are only relative. That is to say, they're valid and useful in a context, but they are not sort of an absolute thing, because the relative world is relative and it's illusory. It's magical and illusory, and therefore it's never quite what you think it is, maybe. Something like that. For example, if you think of us as being, when we think of ourselves as being on a stable land, we're sitting here, and we're at Menla in the healing spa, the Dewa Spa, blissful happiness spa, in the field in a hidden valley, in the Catskills and so on. And we feel this is very, very stable. But actually, we're rotating around the axis of the Earth. And that means we're moving in this latitude, maybe 800 miles an hour. At the equator, since the circumference of the Earth is 24,000 approximately, and you have a day by circling around, that means you're going 1,000 miles an hour, basically. Here we're going maybe 700. I don't know the math of being at the 40s of the latitude. And then the planet itself is going thousands of miles an hour in its orbit around the sun. And then the sun is going hundreds of thousands of miles, according to astronomers, within the galaxy, in the rotation of the Milky Way galaxy. And then what the galaxy is moving in relation to what. So I think they have a calculation, but I forget. It's some other even bigger number. So therefore, our sense of stability is itself illusory, because we're just actually ribbons of light being strewn around, and we're into like, oh, I'm scared of change, and it's terrible impermanence, and I'll worry about it. And actually, because we think we're this stable being that's just sort of sitting here in the house, But actually, the whirling around the cosmos is what we're doing. We're like a kind of ribbon, all of us interwoven, and the planets. And it gives a new reasoning for astrology, actually. In other words, the influence of the planetary energies, because they are also like ribbons of energy zapping around with us trailing along around the sun, and the whole thing is like shooting at 100,000 miles, 166,000 miles a minute or an hour or a second, I forget, but really fast. So even that old cosmology was sort of suitable, I guess, for them in India at the time, and it was conventional, and Buddha didn't challenge it. He just, within it, he added the form realms, the desire realm, heavens, the hells, the form realms. It's likely that hells came out to be people be more aware of that, precisely in the time that Buddha taught his theory of evolution based on the theory of karma. Because within that theory is the fact that given infinite time of life, it's not beginning and ending any one place, even though a particular planetary system might collapse. That they predict. They call it the rising of 7 suns. It's like a supernova prediction about this solar system, but when the sun explodes. But then you take rebirth in other planets, because there's endless human planets according to them. And the fact that we're on this one is our good luck, because it's a very lucky one that we live on, with beautiful plants and Buddhas visiting and so on. And but there are many according to this vision of the cosmos. And then there's those heavens and hells and preta realms, hunger being realms, hunger games, hunger being realms. And then animal, of course we all know the animal realm, that's the one we do know. And insects and animals and reptiles and so on, mammals. And then the human one, right? And so within the history of the time, then they taught like Mount Sumeru. So Mount Olympus was the axis mundi, the sort of planetary axis. It's easiest to think of it as that. So now Buddha ascends to the peak of Mount Sumeru. So then by the spiritual power of the enlightened one, and Tom always calls spiritual power, he doesn't want to say magical, because it's only a power that the enlightened one manifests for spiritual purpose. What does spiritual mean to a Buddhist? Fortunately, Tom is passed. I can't ask you. Tom, wherever he is, I'm sure he's in translator's heaven. But by spirit, I like to translate the mind of enlightenment, the mind of an enlightening being, It's a mind of love and compassion for all beings. Initially an intention, and then a will, and then a vow, and then ultimately when you become a Buddha, it's an actual mind. It's a mind of bliss that flows out to every being just automatically, with no effort, coming from the reality of the bliss in the universe. And so I like to think spiritual. By that he meant that it's a magical power that's only for the goodness of beings, that he does sort of miraculous things, the Buddha. So he always wants to put spiritual power, because if he says magical, people might think, well, it's kind of a deception or something. If he says illusory, and it's a word like that. The word urdi and vikurvana, the various words for the sort of supernormal, I never say supernatural, but supernormal powers that enlightened beings have, and also some unenlightened beings can have. It's not only enlightened beings, but the enlightened beings ones are more powerful because they are more powerful, according to the Buddhist view. And the reason they're more powerful, I should share that with you actually, before I go into the reading and do it on the text. But the reason that they're more powerful is that the enlightened being draws energy from the need of infinite other beings that they empathize with. So they have lots of people's needs driving their activities. Otherwise, they don't do anything, because they are really one with the great energy that is infinite and perceives things as already done. But they do things, therefore, driven by other beings' need. The unenlightened, the extreme of the unenlightened person, when it gets to the demonic level, like some of our politicians, they only working for themselves. So they only have their own need, and they're completely obsessed with fulfilling their own need. But that's only one small person, actually, even if they're a big fat person. Even if they're a god, they're still only one person's effort. So I have this theory that the good is infinity, because since they're infinite beings, infinity to the power of infinity. And bad is infinity to the power of one. So the good is better and more powerful. And that's a really hard thing for us to get, because Jesus, who was an enlightened being for sure, taught that, but the Roman emperor didn't like that, him teaching that, so the Romans killed him. And then the subconscious message that they did, when they took over Christianity after about 300 years later, when they took it over, they emphasized the weakness of the good by promoting the crucifix, which was actually the Roman execution machine, like an electric chair. It's like if you made a fetish out of the electric chair and went around with it hanging around your neck and so on. So the subliminal message is Caesar is more powerful. That is the oppressive emperor, who's actually quite negative to the people underneath him, or if it's an empress, her. But the message, the subliminal message of focusing on the crucifix, of course theology says, well, it shows the ultimate self-sacrifice, and it does. And that because he let it happen. And that's good, that then you can make something good out of anything negative. But actually the Roman motive was not to show some transcendence of Jesus. It was to show that he was nailed up there by Caesar, or the Caesar's officer, Pontius Pilate. And so that the emperor is more powerful. Render unto Caesar, that was the message. So instead of the liberating teaching of Jesus, it became the domineering teaching of the Roman emperor. So that happened historically. And Christians, if they want to be good Christians and live on the Jesus path, not only have Jesus live on the Jesus path and save them, but also themselves join Jesus on the path and try to help others. Love thy neighbor, as thyself, And if they want to do that, then they have to kind of a little bit look at the history and understand the context, and then they'll be happier. Okay? So then by the spiritual, that's about, he was always saying spiritual power. And the spirit, therefore, what you have to understand by spirit, that means the love power, basically, really. Compassion power is why he calls it spiritual, I would say. Because there's no word in the Sanskrit for spiritual. It's just urdhi means a magical power, or supernormal ability. So the spiritual power of the enlightened one in the Jambudvipa continent of all worlds in the 10 directions. You see, all the other humanoid worlds are similar to this planet. And they all have 4 continents, and they have an axial mountain, and blah, 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 like that. So all worlds in the 10 directions. There was seen the enlightened one sitting under a tree, in each place with enlightening beings receiving the Buddha's spiritual power and expounding the teaching, all thinking they were at all times facing the Buddha in person. So that was another great, without Facebook, without the internet, Buddha could be teaching 100,000 people in a vast field, or many more, even millions. And then each one would see the Buddha right in front of them. And also each one would hear what he was teaching in his own language, or his or her own language. And the animals would hear an animal language, and the dragons in dragon language, and so on. So Buddha was there with them in person, all thinking they were there. At that time, the Buddha, without leaving the foot of the enlightenment tree, so he's still staying in India at Bodh Gaya under the Bodhi tree, ascended Mount Sumeru and headed for the palace of Indra. Then Indra, king of the gods, that's Zeus, Indra, Odin, or Zeus, Indra is. He's the king of the gods who is still on the planet, but on top of a mountain, cosmic mountain. Then Indra, king of the gods, in front of the hall of surpassing wonder, which I guess is the name of his palace. Seeing the Buddha, because this is translated through Chinese, Tom, doesn't try to reconstruct like the Sanskrit name of the hall, but he just translates the meaning, which was the Chinese don't like multisyllabic words, and the way their language is, and so they take the elements of a Sanskrit word, and they break it down and they translate it with characters. So then in English you get hall of surpassing wonder. Seeing Buddha coming from afar, adorned this palace by means of his supernormal power. He says supernatural. Okay, so fine, supernatural power. He put in it a lion throne of banks of radiant lights, all made of exquisite jewels, with 10,000 levels of dazzling ornaments and 10,000 nets of gold covering it, 10,000 kinds of curtains and 10,000 levels of canopies arrayed all around, with 10,000 embroidered silks as curtain sashes, 10,000 strings of pearls joined together, and 10,000 robes spread on the throne. 10,000 godlings and 10,000 Brahma kings surrounded it in front and behind, while 10,000 lights in front and behind, while 10,000 light beams illumined it. A really amazing throne set. And why does he say 10,000 Brahma kings? Why he says that is because the Brahma is like the superior form realm deity, as far as in the Buddhist cosmos. In the Indian cosmos of Buddha's time, Brahma was a creator deity, and he's still in some versions of Hinduism, he's thought of as the creator. Shiva the destroyer, Vishnu the preserver, And then they say, well, Vishnu is the main one, and he just emanates Brahma and Shiva. Some say Shiva is the main one, and they emanate Brahma and Vishnu, etc. The Indians are very good about that. It would be like in the Abrahamic tradition, if the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews would say, well, you're Allah, our Yahweh is your Allah, and you're Jehovah. And then the Christian would say, well, our Jehovah is your Allah and your thing. So they would all say, well, we all have the same God. In other words, it's a way of avoiding fighting over the name of the divine. So it's kind of a good Indian thing. But these 10,000 Brahma kings, therefore, come from 10,000 different worlds in the universe. And they came just to hear the Buddha, because that's where he's functioning. And he also is in other worlds simultaneously, supposedly. Because this is, remember, the holographic vision of the universe. Then Indra, having set up this throne for the enlightened one, bowed and joined his palms, reverently facing the Buddha, and asked, welcome, world-honored one, welcome, blissful one, welcome, realized one, perfectly enlightened one. So world-honored one would be Bhagavan, welcome, blissful one would be Sugata, welcome, realized one would be Tathagata, one who has realized suchness. Perfectly enlightened one is Samyak Sambuddha. Realistically enlightened one, I would want to translate nowadays for Yak Samyak. Realistically enlightened one. Please be so compassionate as to sojourn in this place, in this palace, rather. Then the Buddha, accepting his invitation, entered the hall of surpassing wonder. This also took place in the same way in all the worlds of the 10 directions. So there each world has an Olympus heaven, a Mount Sumeru heaven, where the Vedic god Indra lives, the sort of tribal god Indra, and with his 33 different varieties of gods and so on. Then, due to the Buddha's spiritual power, all the music in the palaces spontaneously ceased, and Indra recalled to himself how he had planted roots of goodness with Buddhas of the past. As he did, he spoke in verse, saying, Kashyapa Buddha had great compassion, supreme among the auspicious. That Buddha has come into this palace, hence this place is most auspicious. Kanaka Muni's vision was unobstructed, supreme among the auspicious. That Buddha has come into this place, hence this place is most auspicious. Krakuchanda was like a mountain of gold, supreme among the auspicious. That Buddha has come to this place, hence this place is most auspicious. Vishvabhu Buddha was undefiled, supreme among the auspicious. That Buddha has come into this place, hence this place is most auspicious. Shikin Buddha was free from discrimination, supreme among the auspicious. So the same 3 lines in each verse, mentioning the name of the Buddhas previous to Shakyamuni Buddha. Vipashin Buddha, Pushya Buddha, Tishya Buddha, Padma Buddha, Dipankara Buddha. As in this world, the king of the 33-fold heaven, Indra, by the spiritual power of the Buddha, extolled the virtues of 10 Buddhas. So did all the Indras in the worlds of the 10 directions also praise the Buddha's virtues. Then the world-honored one entered the hall of surpassing wonder and sat cross-legged. This hall suddenly became vastly spacious, like the dwelling places of all the celestial hosts. The same thing happened in all the worlds in the 10 directions when Buddha was there. So here's a set of 10 Buddhas, and actually up to Kashyapa, Kanakamuni, and Krakuchanda are usually the 3 Buddhas in this world system before Shakyamuni, who is the 4th. But Indra's looking back, and he's finding 10 because everything is always 10 in the. It's very short. So book 13 is very, very short. It's just Indra remembering all the previous Buddhas. So that's kind of interesting. As I said, in the 1,000 Buddhas of the Golden Aeon Sutra, Buddha is considered to be the 4th, and a particularly virtuous one because he comes when the world is in a typical place with a lot of violence. So he's born in the warrior class, the kingly class, royal class, which are the commanders-in-chief of the warriors. And other Buddhas are born in the priest class or the intellectual class, very often, when people are living a longer lifespan, there's very little violence. Maitreya, for example, the next Buddha, who is the 5th one. But then in different versions of Buddhism, they have 10, they have 7, they have all kinds of other things. So don't get dogmatic about descriptions of the relative. Remember that it's all inconceivable. And you'll be okay. So now eulogies on Mount Sumeru is book 14. So then, due to the spiritual power of the Buddha, there came and gathered great enlightening beings from each of the 10 directions, each accompanied by as many enlightening beings as atoms in a Buddha land, coming from worlds far away beyond lands as numerous as atoms in 100 Buddha lands. Their names were wisdom of truth, total wisdom, supreme wisdom, virtuous wisdom, vigorous wisdom, good wisdom, knowing wisdom, true wisdom, unexcelled wisdom, and stable wisdom. No doubt 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, exactly. So those are the 10 principal enlightening beings who led these vast hosts of enlightening beings to see the Buddha. The worlds they came from were called Indra flower, red flower, jewel flower, blue lotus, diamond flower, fragrant flower, delightful flower, rosy dawn flower, adorning flower, and space flower. They had each cultivated pure practice with Buddhas. The Buddhas of their different worlds were called extraordinary moon, infinite moon, imperturbable moon, wind moon, water moon, liberation moon, unexcelled moon, constellation moon, pure moon, and comprehending moon. When the enlightening beings had reached the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, therefore our Buddha, they prostrated themselves at the Buddha's feet and then magically produced luminous lion seats in the directions from which they had come. In the same way as the enlightening beings gathered atop Mount Sumeru in this world, so it was in all worlds. Their names, worlds, the names of their Buddhas were all like this. At that juncture, the Buddha emitted 100,000 billion light beams of sublime hue from the toes of his feet, illumining all the worlds in the 10 directions, so that the Buddhas and congregations in the palaces of the Indras atop the Mount Sumerus were all revealed to each other. Then the enlightening being wisdom of truth, infused with spiritual power from the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, so he was the first of the 10 bodhisattvas, and so they're going to give some eulogies. By the way, this kind of thing about it's all happening simultaneously in many universes is kind of very important. And also the science fictional, although now there are many exoplanets or humanoid possible planets, astronomers are discovering them more and more, and they calculate there's so many zillions of them, even in this galaxy. Finally, they have done that, but so far there's been no communication that they know about between them. That meaning that no humans have in those other planets, if there are any there, which people are kind of doubtful about in our materialist society. Because the idea kind of is this is the only place there ever was any human, and the normal biology of this planet is unique, and blah, 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 because we're in this big lonely universe, where we are sort of a meaningless bunch of material atoms running around thinking we exist, and that we're alive. And the materialism has rejected that idea, materialist science. So we're just biological robots. But and Carl Sagan, the imaginative one among such materialist scientists, created the SETI program where they send out sounds and radio transmissions and whatever, space flights, seeking contact from other worlds, but so far they haven't received any that they've noticed. But the Buddhist thing, the key about it, the reason for it is that we're not that lonely in the universe. The life is vast. It is what's happening in the universe. And the life is based on goodness. And it's based on beings trying to be connected to each other and interconnectedness. And therefore, this is kind of very important, because what is one of the things that is a big obstacle to people for doing what's good? Why isn't Joe Manchin voting vastly, and the whole Congress, and the people in the oil industry deciding to invest in alternative oil sources? They have huge capital, and they don't taking their bank loans instead of drilling for more oil. Why aren't they creating more alternatives, more actively, for example, and just doing good? Why? Well, because people think, well, it's very rare that anybody does anything good. Everybody's always out for themselves. They're always, so we'll never make it. And so what? So I'm going to live it up and get as much money as I can before we are all destroyed anyway. And so everyone has this kind of fatalistic and apathetic and self-defeating attitude, actually, in our world. That is the real reason, and that is the real gift, actually, of the Tibetan culture, in the sense that it is one of the few unique cultures on the planet. There were a number of them in India, but they later got trampled. So we lost sight of them, but they're still there, kind of hidden there. But Tibet was the place where the whole country, because of its inaccessibility, was able to demilitarize and become a gentle culture, and a culture bringing out the inner sensitivity and intelligence of the beings on a more holistic way, although not by any means perfect either, but on the way to it, more on the way to it than other places. And so they don't accept such a self-defeating view of life. They insist that we can do good. And that is the way of the cosmos, actually. And there's vast numbers of beings everywhere that are doing good. And so good is more powerful, and that gives us a hope and shifts our motivation. And that's crucial to solving this this climate challenge, planetary challenge problem. It's people deciding they have to do it, they can do it, they are going to do it, and starting to do it even some small way in front of themselves, one by one. And then bigger ways politically, and then with governments, and then with militaries and things, turning militaries into peace armies, and engineering squads and whatever, building alternative energy, to put the army to build out windmills and wind generators and solar panels, and do all the work that it's required to shift over energy sources as radically and rapidly as possible. We have to have a motive of thinking it's doable. And there has to be a sense of hope rather than the depression that is the major industry in America. And in the people in the the developing world, as they call it, the less technologically developed world, they are really under the gun. They are being flooded out, droughted out, boiled out, whatever you want. They're being wasted. Their islands are being submerged. So they can't afford to be hopeless. They just have to scrap and try to do something. But the people with the power who are actually causing the problem and who could actually do something are the ones who have afflicted with this huge depression, that there's nothing that can be done and it will all fail. And therefore, why should I bother to do it? Instead, I'm gonna make more money in my West Virginia coal mine. I'm not gonna make some sacrifice, Anyway, why does he need to be reelected at 73? He's a wealthy man. He can be happy fixing up a nice garden in West Virginia rather than bringing more filthy coal out to burn. Ridiculous, really. But that's a motivation. The defeatism leads then to the excuse for continuing selfishness is the problem. Buddha emits a pure, so then he began to speak. Wisdom of truth began to speak. Buddha emits a pure light, showing all the guides of the worlds, sojourning in the hall of wonder on the peaks of the Mount Sumerus. So he does this in many worlds simultaneously, like in a hologram. Everything happens in every atom of every, and not even mentioning that it's also happening in the worlds in every atom of every world. All of the kings of gods inviting the Buddhas into the palace, all with the 10 beautiful verses, praising the enlightened one. So that's also happened in manifold ways. Among those great assemblies, the groups of enlightening beings have come from the 10 directions and sit calmly on the seats they made. The enlightening beings in those congregations all have the same names as we, and the names of the lands they come from are also the same as ours. The Buddhas of their own lands also have the same names as ours. Each one has with the Buddha purely cultivated, unexcelled practices. Buddha children, you should observe the Buddha's power of freedom in all the Jambudvipas, that's the humanoid worlds. And all that you can make it Eurasia, they can make it India, you can make it the human plane, whatever. All think the Buddha's there. We now see the Buddha on top of Mount Sumeru. It's the same in the 10 directions by the Buddha's power of freedom. In each world, they determined to seek the Buddha way, all based on such a vow. Practice enlightening deeds. And based on such a vow, practice enlightening deeds. Buddha with various bodies travels throughout the worlds, unhindered in the cosmos, beyond the ken of anyone. The light of his wisdom always shines everywhere, removing all the darkness of the world. It has no compare at all. How can it be comprehended? So those were his 10 verses. Then the enlightening being, total wisdom, infused with the power of the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, even if one always looked at Buddha for 100,000 aeons, not according to the absolute truth, but looking at the Savior of the world in the relative truth, such a person is grasping appearances and increasing the web of ignorance and delusion, bound in the prison of birth and death, blind, unable to really see the Buddha. So you're just all fascinated by the relative activities and you're not according to the absolute freedom and emptiness of all things. Observing all things to be without inherent existence, whatever their appearances of origin and disappearance, being just provisional descriptions. All things are unborn, all things are imperishable. To one who can understand this, the Buddha will always be manifest. So that's putting it, That's seeing the nirvanic aspect of anything in the relative, that everything in the relative is such as it is, and it is all unique, and it is all therefore indescribable and inconceivable, because it's at the same time it seems to be some sort of object and it's just over there sitting there, and yet it is a manifestation of clear light. It's made of clear light. It is clear light. And so that it is emptiness. It is freedom. And this is the deep paramita type teaching. The nature of things is fundamentally empty and null, with no grasping and no vision. The emptiness of inherent nature is Buddha. It cannot be assessed in thought. If one knows the inherent nature of all things is like this person will not be affected by any afflictions. So this means that you become completely content, released, fulfilled, enlightened in every moment, in any particular way, in any different context. You're always never disconnected from the great freedom of nirvana. You're living in the bliss of nirvana. Ordinary people seeing things just pursue the forms and don't realize things are formless. Because of this, they don't see Buddha. The sage is detached from the realm of time, replete with the marks of greatness, dwelling in non-dwelling, omnipresent without moving. I observe all things and clearly understand them. Now I see the Buddha with certainty, free from doubt. Wisdom of truth has already explained the real nature of the enlightened. From him I have understood that enlightenment's inconceivable. So he's playing off the other one and more focusing on the transcendent level of things, whereas this one is focusing on the magnificence of the relative level of things. So although he says that if you look at Buddha for 100,000 aeons, not according to the absolute truth, but looking at the Savior of the world, which should be good, he says, but such a person is grasping appearances and increasing the web of ignorance and delusion. So you begin to think it's Buddha over there, and I'm not a Buddha, and this is separate, and I have to find nirvana somewhere, and we're in the world together, etc. So that person is bound in the prison of birth and death, and blind, unable to see the Buddha. So that's like in the Vimalakirti Sutra, where Vimalakirti meets Shakyamuni Buddha toward the end of the sutra, and then Buddha says, now you want to come and see the Buddha. Now you see the Buddha, what do you see? And he says, I don't see the Buddha when I just see a body here. In other words, I'm looking at you, but that's not the Buddha. You're not the Buddha. The Buddha is beyond all of this. The Buddha is everything. I'm the Buddha. Every atom of mine is the Buddha. Everyone here is the Buddha, the building, the place. In other words, the Buddha is the nirvanic lack of intrinsic reality, freedom, freedom, bliss, non-dual energy of everything. Then the enlightening being supreme wisdom, receiving power from the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, the enlightened one's great wisdom is rare beyond compare. All beings in the world cannot reach it in their thoughts. Ordinary people's deluded views grasp forms and are not veritable. Buddha is beyond all forms, so not within their view. The deluded and unknowing wrongly grasp the forms of the 5 clusters, not just the aggregates of form, sensation, conception, emotion, and consciousness. 5 clusters, not understanding their true nature, such people don't see Buddha. Knowing that all things have no inherent being of their own, understanding the nature of things this way, one will see Vairochana. So that's the cosmic Buddha. And when you understand the utter relativity of everything, and that things lack any kind of self-separate, self-subsistent, self-intrinsically real reality that is sort of the source of their reality, like an intrinsic reality. And they have, or inherent being, or own being. They have no such thing. So understanding the nature of things this way, one will see Vairochana. Caused by the preceding 5 clusters, succeeding clusters arise in continuum. Comprehending this nature, one sees Buddha inconceivable. Just like a jewel in the dark cannot be seen if there's no lamp. With no one to explain Buddha's teaching, even the intelligent cannot comprehend it. And like an eye with cataracts cannot see pure, beautiful colors, so too the impure mind cannot see the Buddha's teaching. And as the bright, clear sun cannot be seen by the blind, those who have no wisdom can never see the Buddhas. If one can remove the eye's cataracts and abandon the concept of form or matter and not see in terms of things, then one can see the Buddha. Total wisdom has explained the enlightenment of the Buddhas. I, having learned from him, have gotten to see Vairochana. So each one is instructed by the previous one. But again, it's sort of the interwovenness of relative and absolute is always going on because of their non-duality, according to the vision of these enlightening beings. Then the enlightening being, virtuous wisdom, imbued with the power from the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, things have no true reality because of wrongly grasping them as real. Do ordinary people therefore revolve in the prison of birth and death? And that's really good. They have no true reality, but we grasp them as real, and therefore we revolve in the prison of birth and death. That's like my old teacher used to say, people think they're real and they're not wrong, but what the problem is, they tend to think they're really real. and that's where they go wrong. Things expressed by words, those of lesser wisdom wrongly discriminate and therefore create barriers and don't comprehend even their own minds. If one doesn't comprehend one's own mind, how can one know the right path? Based on a misconstrued intellect, they increase all evils. Not seeing all things are empty, always suffering the pains of birth and death. This is because such people cannot yet have the pure objective eye. In the past, objective eye means an eye that merges with whatever they see, so the object, it sees itself in a certain way. In the past, I experienced suffering because I didn't see Buddha. So one should clarify the eye of reality to see and see what is to be seen. So this is the idea of realism, that Buddhism is realism. Because if you know the reality of things, you see through them. And you realize they are kind of illusory things. It's like you're watching a film, Avatar, and you're all into Jake trying to survive as the panther is chasing him or whatever, and he falls in the water or whatever, and you're really involved and engaged in that. But then if you simultaneously were aware that it was just lights playing on a screen, and the screen is itself blank, and the lights are creating this illusion of you're with Jake in the Avatar world of Pandora, of that moon of Jupiter or whatever it's supposed to be. And if you knew both simultaneously, then you could still appreciate the drama and the tension and the suspense and the rooting for Jake to survive and to save the Ewa tree and so on. But you would, in another way, you would be, you kind of do know it's just a movie. So you don't go quite to the extreme you would if it was really happening. But you can get lost in it, for sure. If one can see the Buddha, one's mind will have no grasping. Such a person can then perceive truth as the Buddha knows it. If one can see Buddha's real teaching, one is said to have great knowledge. This person has pure eyes and can see into the world. No view is seeing, which can see all things. So being free of a rigid or fanatic or real, sort of overemphasized or exaggerated view is called no view. So being viewless is seeing, which can see all things. If one has any views about things, this is not seeing anything. So they're taking view as a kind of conviction where you have a theory about things and you impose that on the thing. That's a real pillar over there with the red paint and with the beautiful ornamentation here in the Dewa Spa at Menla. And so that's my view, that it's so beautiful and that it's really, really what it seems to be. It's really, really what it seems to be instead of just, it just seems to be something. And so, but only when I have no view about it. Therefore, my mind, and the wonderful thing about vision is you get up close to something that's far away from you. So in a way, I merge with I am the pillar over there. There's no boundary between me and the pillar, it's me. And I don't have a view, then I really see it. Because I feel I am it. You follow me? It's part of my body, the pillar and the gateway, and marvelous thing. So no view is seeing, which can see all things. If one has any views about things, this is not seeing anything. The nature of all things has no origin and no end. How wonderful the great guide awakened himself, he can awaken others. Supreme wisdom has explained the truth realized by the Buddhas. We, having learned from him, can know the Buddha's true nature. So each one's last verse praises the one before them. Then the enlightened being, vigorous wisdom, receiving power from the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, if one dwells on discrimination, one ruins the eye of purity. Ignorant, false views increase, and one never sees the Buddha. If one can understand falsehood as it is, without delusion, and know the basis of delusion is itself reality, one's perception of the Buddha will be pure. If there are views, there is defilement. This is not yet to be considered seeing. By dismissing all views, can one thus see the Buddha. So in that sense, realistic view is no view where you just become the reality around you. Things spoken of in conventional terms without interpreting it, without imposing one's conceptual network on it. Things spoken of in conventional terms, people wrongly conceptualize, knowing the world is all birthless, unborn. This is seeing the world. If one sees their equal, no different, one won't discriminate among things. Such vision is free from delusion. Without indulgence, it is free. All the different things pointed out by the Buddhas are impossible to apprehend because their nature's pure. The nature of things is fundamentally pure. Like space, it has no marks. Nothing at all can explain it. This do the wise observe. Divorcing the concept of things, not indulging in anything, and not even cultivating this, one can see the great sage. That's like real Dzogchen, actually. Great perfection where you just have to relax and because you are the reality. As virtuous wisdom explained, this is called one who sees Buddha. All the actions there be are all inherently nil. That is to say, they lack inherent existence. They only have relational existence. And that relational existence, it's inconceivable. You can't say what it is. There's universes in every atom of everything, etc., etc. It goes on endlessly. So then the enlightening being good wisdom infused with Buddha's power, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, extraordinary, the great beings, the countless enlightened ones, are free from taint, their minds are free, self-liberated, they can liberate others. I see the lamps of the worlds as they are without delusion, as one who has accumulated knowledge over aeons can see. The acts of ordinary people all soon pass away. Their nature is like space, so said to be without end. When the wise speak of endlessness, this is still not saying anything, because inherent nature is endless. It can have an inconceivable end. That's a deep, deep one. When the wise speak of endlessness, this is still not saying anything, because inherent nature is endless. It can have an inconceivable end. In the endlessness spoken, the inconceivable end, of course, is where it has no beginning. The inconceivable end is where you realize the deep nature of everything. You see through everything. You realize the uncreatedness of everything, and that the uncreated is the nature of it all. And therefore, it doesn't need an end because it never began. And it's been free from the beginning. And one has always been there. And it's not a new understanding in a way, when you get it. Although when you don't have it, then you need something new. In the endlessness spoken of, there are no beings to be found. Knowing the nature of things is thus. One will see the honored one. Yes, there are no beings to be found. This is a very profound thing about the highest level of compassion. The initial level of true compassion is the compassion that perceives beings and feels compassion for them. The next higher level is the compassion that sees processes, impersonal processes, and still has compassion for the beings who are only these processes. And then the final level of compassion is the compassion that has no object. It doesn't see anybody. It doesn't see any being. And that is the most powerful one, Because what that means is that compassion is pure empathy of feeling the other being's feeling and drilling down to where the other being, even the most suffering being, has at their core. They have a core of being aware of bliss because they are bliss. And they know it themselves, but then they conceal, they bury their knowing under a cloud of erroneous concepts and under ignorance, and so they don't know what they really are. So when you really see them as unborn, or let's just say see through them, then you are their own energy liberating them. You are empowering their own energy liberating them, but to you it's an effortless thing because their own energy is trying to liberate them. But maybe you add something with your compassion, which is from your bliss. You can maybe sort of guide it this way and that way, like channeling an irrigation canal or something. You just sort of pat you don't create the energy, they have it, but you kind of like a doctor, you sort of channel the healing energy within themselves. So the great compassion that has no object, non-objectifying great compassion, is compassion based on a bliss that embraces all beings without seeing them as anything separate from oneself. So, no view is called seeing. The birthless is called beings. Whether views or beings, knowing they've no substantial nature, the seer dismisses entirely the subject and object of seeing, but without destroying reality, this person knows the Buddha. So there's the non-dual. When you have the same non-dual awareness, you know the Buddha because you are one. Your awareness is one with the Buddha's awareness. You're the Dharma. You reach the Dharmakaya there when you've dismissed entirely the subject and object of seeing. You don't destroy reality, but you know the Buddha. If one knows the Buddha and the truth of the Buddha tells, one can illumine the world like Buddha Vairochana does. The truly enlightened point out well the pure road of one truth. The great being, vigorous wisdom, expounds innumerable teachings. Whether of existence or non-existence, his conceptions are all removed. Thus he can see the Buddha and abide in reality. Then the enlightening being, knowing wisdom, imbued with power from the Buddha, looked over the tender and said in verse. Next one is from knowing wisdom. We're almost there. Hearing the supreme teaching, I produced the light of wisdom, illumining all worlds everywhere, seeing all the Buddhas. Herein there's not the slightest thing, only provisional names. Those who think they're self and person enter a dangerous path due to this. So in their dualism and in their thinking that the name, things that are merely created by naming them are really what they are, and there's an intrinsic referent, and intrinsic identity in each thing that corresponds to its name. Though that's thinks there's a self and a person, enter a dangerous path due to this. I think I have an intrinsic identity and other beings have intrinsic identities and so forth. That's a dangerous path of endless opposition and alienation. People who grasp and cling think the body really exists. The Buddha is not something grasped, so they never get to see. These people lack the eye of wisdom and cannot see the Buddha, circulating in the sea of birth and death through uncountable aeons. Contention is called birth and death. Non-contention is nirvana. Birth and death and nirvana both cannot be grasped. If one pursues samsara and nirvana, neither one can be grasped, actually, really. If one pursues provisional names and grasps these two things, one is not in accord with reality and doesn't know the sage's subtle path. If one produces such conceptions, this is Buddha, this is supreme, one is deluded, this is not real truth. Thus one cannot see true awakening. If one can know this real body's quiescent character of true thusness, one can see the truly enlightened transcending the path of speech. Things expressed in words cannot disclose the character of reality. Only through equanimity can one see things, including the Buddha. The truly enlightened in the past, the future, and the present forever sever the root of discrimination. That's why they're called Buddha. Then the enlightening being, true wisdom, empowered by the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, I'd rather suffer the pains of hell while able to hear the name of Buddha than to experience boundless pleasure without hearing the name of Buddha. That's a pretty intense. Now it's like the Pure Land school is based on the vow of Amitabha Buddha, who was as a disciple, as an enlightening being. His name was Dharmakara, the mind of truth, or the mind of reality, mind of teaching. And he made a vow that I won't be a Buddha until any being who calls my name with sincerity will be instantly transported into my Buddha world. And no matter what else they did, type of thing. So it's sort of like infinite compassion. And this was in Japan. The school was, I'm sure it was invented already in India and already everywhere, and it is the sutra of that. But it was reinvented in Japan in the 14th century, late 14th century, which was a Renaissance, building up to the worldwide Renaissance, by someone called Shinran, where he suddenly felt the meaning of that. And then he called the name, and then he felt he was in the Pure Land. He felt it come to him just by calling that name. So he was kind of like a Martin Luther type of figure who felt he was a monk in a monastic mountain where they had 15,000 temples. And basically, I guess, I don't know how many, they were categorized into how many monasteries, but there were 15,000 temples in his era. And he was doing his meditations and so on in his studies, but he couldn't get there. And then he realized he was hopeless sinner, so to speak, and unable to purify himself. But nevertheless, he could call Amitabha, and Amitabha would then bring him into the Buddha land, where he could be capable of realizing something. So it's the most important school in Japan. So the reason for suffering in the past over countless aeons, revolving within birth and death, is due to not hearing the name of Buddha, not deluded about things, realizing them as they truly are, detached from all compounded forms. This is called unsurpassed awakening. The present is not compounded, nor are the past and future. All things have no signs. This is the real body of Buddha. If one can see this way the profound truth of things, then one can see all Buddhas, reality body, all the Buddha's reality body in its true aspect. So all the Buddhas have the same reality body, the Dharmakaya, their infinite, ultimate reality body in its true aspect. That is the profound truth of things. His body is everything. Even oneself is part of the reality body. So any Buddha thinks they're me, in addition to everybody else, in specific as well as in general. Seeing what's true as true, and what's not true in nature as untrue, such ultimate understanding is the reason for the name of Buddha. Buddha's truth cannot be perceived. Realizing this is called perceiving truth. The Buddhas practice this way. Nothing can be grasped. Knowing they are many because one, and one because many. So they're many because they're one, and they're one because they're many. Realize all things have no basis and only arise from compounding. There is no creator or created. They only arise from habitual conceptions. How can we know it is so? Because other than this, naught is. All things have no abode, no definite locus can be found. The Buddhas abide in this, ultimately unwavering. So that was the Buddha true wisdom. Finally, there's unexcelled wisdom and then stable wisdom, two more. Then the enlightening being, unexcelled wisdom, receiving Buddha's power, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, the unexcelled great beings dismiss the concept of creatures. None can surpass them. That's why they're called unexcelled. So that's the ones whose compassion is the automatic, because they are the other being that is suffering. So they therefore can help that being, and they reinforce the place in those other beings that is beyond the suffering that they ignorantly think is all that they are. The sphere attained by the Buddhas has no fabrication and no discrimination. The gross has no existence, and neither does the fine. The realms accessible to Buddhas are innumerable therein. True awareness is detached from numbers. This is the Buddha's true teaching. Buddha's light shines everywhere, destroying all darkness and gloom. This light neither has radiance nor does not have radiance. It has no attachment to things, no thought and no defilement, no abode and no location, and does not destroy the nature of things. Herein there is no dualism, and neither is there oneness. One who sees well with great knowledge skillfully abides according to truth. So there's no dualism and no oneness and no manyness. So non-dualism is not monism, this key point. Doesn't mean everything is some sort of sloppy oneness. It's both one and different. No mean and no duality, and not even any non-duality. All in the world is void. This is the vision of the Buddhas. People with no, remember void can be translated as free, as emptiness. People with no awakened understanding, Buddha makes abide in truth. People with no awakened understanding, Buddha makes them abide in the truth. All things have no abode. Understanding this, one sees one's own body, is not a body, yet said to be so, is not born, yet manifests birth. No body and no view, this is the unexcelled Buddha body. Thus has true wisdom explained the nature of the Buddha's subtle teaching, and any who hear this teaching will attain the pure I. Then the enlightening being, stable wisdom, empowered by the Buddha, looked over the 10 directions and said in verse, "How grand the great light, the vigorous unsurpassed hero, who appears in the world to help the confused. The Buddha observes all beings with a heart of great compassion, seeing them in the 3 realms of existence, suffering over and over. Except for the truly enlightened, the honored guide, full of virtue, there is none who can rescue all human and heavenly beings. If the Buddhas and enlightening beings did not appear in the world, there would not be a single creature who could have peace and ease. The Buddha, rightly awakened, as well as the sages and saints, appears in the world, able to bestow happiness on beings. If someone sees the Buddha, that is gaining great benefit. Hearing the name Buddha and developing faith is a monument in the world. We see the world-honored ones and consider it a great boon. Hearing such a wonderful teaching, we shall all attain enlightenment. The enlightening beings in the past, by the spiritual power of Buddha, attained the pure eye of wisdom and perceived the realms of the Buddhas. Now we see Vairochana and grow doubly in pure faith. Buddha's knowledge is boundless and cannot be fully explained. Even if the enlightening beings such as Supreme Wisdom and I, Stable Wisdom, were to speak for countless aeons, we could not tell it all." So there we go. So that's the end of the 14th book. Really quite a lot of Prajnaparamita style teachings. So now we begin with these sets of 10 things, which are kind of practices. And then the famous 10 stages are taught here. And then there's the whole merit of the initial determination for enlightenment, that is the conception of the Bodhisattva spirit, or the spirit of enlightenment. So we have the 10 abodes, which is the initial one, and then there's the thing about producing the spirit of enlightenment. Then there are the 10 practices. Then there's a clarifying method. Then there's the 10 practices. And then he moves from the top of Mount Sumeru in the heaven of 33. He moves again without leaving his seat under the tree. He simultaneously moves to the Tushita Palace, which is where the Buddha comes from. In other words, among the 12 deeds of a perfect Buddha, Supreme Buddha, the first deed is coming from Akanishta heaven, which is the highest form realm heaven, which is almost like infinity, but it is an embodied place at the top of the Brahma realm, top of the realm of pure form, of non-binary beings. And then he descends from that realm of pure energy-bodied realm to the realm in the humanoid desire realm, the heaven of Tushita. And then he spends a long time in Tushita, on earth time, getting ready to come to earth. And then when he leaves, because there's a dharma, Tushita means fully satisfied heaven. And Samtushita is the name of the god, the king of that heaven. And the gods there are into pleasure, of course. It's a desire realm, pleasure heaven. But there is a dharma center in that heaven, and that's where the next Buddha, when Buddha leaves there, he gives his crown as the head teacher in the dharma center in Tushita. He gives it to Maitreya, who then lives there. And a lot of Tibetan yogis and Indian yogis, they aspire to go to be in the presence of the future Buddha Maitreya. When they die, they go to Tushita. And so there's a lot of great scholars in Tushita now. There's great schools there. It's like a school place. And that's where he goes there. And then he teaches the 10 dedications, the second set of 10. And then he teaches, and that's long. Oh my, really long. 10 dedications. That'll take several sessions. And then, wow. And then he goes into the 10 stages. So 10 dedications, 10 practices, and 10 abodes. Correct. That's stages 1 through 29. Okay? Then the 10 stages, which are the famous ones of the Bodhisattvas, then that is 30 to 39. And then after that, there are a set of 10, the 10 concentrations, 10 samadhis. And those are usually not really talked about much. But then you're getting into the incalculable and the 10 acceptances. So there's 20 more, but usually there's only 40 to 49. But then there are even another set of 10, the 10 acceptances, and then finally the incalculable, and then inconceivable qualities of Buddha, and then there's a bunch of more stuff from that perspective, sort of enlightening perspective. And practice of universal good. I'm trying to think, where is the beginning of the ocean of physical marks of 10 bodies of Buddha? Oh, this is unbelievable. It's really, we're going to be here for a while. All the next year maybe this will take. And then detachment from the world. I want to see where I'm entering the realm of reality. Yes. So then finally, starting with book 39, detachment from the world is the end of these different assemblies. So the Buddha teaching everything, and all of this last stuff, I think, is all taught in Tushita. It's all taught in Tushita heaven. And so all of those 52 different stages, according to the Chinese, although that sounds to me like 60. But anyway, 52. Usually, people say it's only the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva, basically, really, and that gets you to Buddhahood. But there are these 30 before that, and then there's 13 or so after that. And then this all these 52, or maybe more, but 52 that I know of. This last bit starting on book 39 and on page 1135 and going to the end, which is up to page 1518. So about 400 pages at the end, so the last quarter of the book, then comes back to earth, and there Buddha and Manjushri send off a human bodhisattva on earth who's a yuppie. He's a banker's son. His name is Sudana. And Sudana means good wealth or good food. And then he goes and he meets 52 teachers, each one of whom has one of the final samadhis, the concentrations, And so, in a way, this last part is sort of like the human, on our level in India, or in America, or wherever it is, the human sort of acceptance or realization or progression, pilgrim's progress. progression up all these 52 stages that are taught celestially under the Bodhi tree. At the whole time he's under the Bodhi tree. And yet he's all over the universe. So then now we're beginning. So that begins then from book 15 with the 10 abodes. And in the same assembly with all these enlightening beings, true wisdom and so forth, truth, wisdom and so forth. And so we might, so we'll conclude this one session, having ascended to Mount Sumeru, and then on Sumeru he teaches these 10 abodes. And we'll conclude that, and we'll start the next one to do the 10 abodes and the different practices and the spirit of enlightenment. We'll do that next. Okay, so you wait to get there. Oh, he goes beyond Tushita. He goes to Suyama. Suyama is above Tushita. So Tushita is the fourth. No, Suyama is below Tushita. He goes back down to Suyama. Somehow. Because he teaches, he's everywhere actually is what it is. So the Suyama is the one of non-contention, but it's usually at the third level of desire realm heavens, rather than the fifth. Fifth one being Nirmanarati. Okay, 10 abodes. Okay? So we dedicate the merit of this session to everyone, to quickly becoming Buddha Vairochanas ourselves, to be able to bring all beings into equality with us as Buddha Vairochanas.